When we talk about women's issues, oftentimes men are the perpetrators of those issues. And so I think it's important that we allow spaces for women to occupy the microphone and to speak about what is going on, especially black women, because they've always been at the forefront of so many different movements and fighting for, especially black men, but our country in general. And this is a continuation of a conversation we've been doing all year. So myself, Malcolm Jenkins, Jordan, Thomas Morstead, and Craig Robertson, all captains for this year's Saints team. Before we jump into this conversation, we'll allow the ladies to introduce themselves, starting with Dr. Celeste Lee.
Hello, I'm excited to be here with you all to talk with you about race and sexism and hopefully some classism in there as well. My name is Dr. Celeste Lee. I am an assistant professor of sociology at Spelman College in Atlanta. I study issues of race and inequality specifically, and how gender or sexism intersects to shape unique experiences for Black women.
I am Taylor Rooks. I am a host and reporter with Bleacher Report and Turner Sports, and I am just happy to be here with the New Orleans Saints to have a very necessary and important conversation about Black women, both in America and in the sports space, and the things that we can do to, I guess, improve, the conditions and the treatment, but also, just start a dialogue about some things that should be addressed.
Maria Taylor. I'm also an Atlanta native. Shout out to Fulton County. I work for ESPN as a host, reporter, and anchor in all things sports, but specifically NBA, college football, and college basketball. And I'm more than happy to be here talking about intersectionality because I see it all the time on and off the field as it relates to being a Black woman in this space.
Hey guys, Natasha Cloud of the Washington Mystics, currently playing in Italy. I have to put in there that I'm a Philly native. I know I'm like breaking the mold, but I have Philly stand up. But excited to be here, excited to be in the presence of greatness. And again, shout out to y'all on the Saints because this is huge for our kings stepping up for our queens.
All right, so one of the first things we wanted to dive into is the term intersectionality and what that means. And a lot of the conversations I've had with other Black men or just men in general about Black issues and Black women, a lot of the time some people are confused as to why there's a need to differentiate or section up kind of these issues, that are different from Black men and Black women. Doesn't Black Lives Matter kind of encompass all of what we're trying to get accomplished? And so I wanted to, and we can start with you, Dr. Lee, just on why is it important to frame these issues specifically about Black women? How are they different than maybe, the things that Black people in general deal with, and why is that important?
Yeah, I think when we hear the term intersectionality, when we talk about the multiple social identities that we wear or bring into a space, we kind of think of them as separately, right? In some spaces, I'm Black. In some spaces, I'm a woman. But the reality, when we talk about intersectionality, is how all of these social identities, race, gender, class, sexual orientation, they overlap. And it's the overlapping that makes it important to talk about the differences, because that overlapping suggests that the way in which Black women experience racism is distinctly different than how Black men experience racism. Of course, there are some commonalities, but there are some ways in which it's nuanced. Likewise, the ways in which Black women experience sexism is distinctly different from the ways in which white women experience sexism. So being knowledgeable about the ways in which the experience of racism and sexism is different based on other social identity markers is important for our ability to be able to address these systems of disadvantage and oppression, so that if we're serious about really dismantling the system of racism or dismantling the system of sexism, that we have to be knowledgeable about and aware of the ways in which it impacts people differently, particularly Black women.
I was watching a video, it was Bozoma St. John was talking about her success being a CMO at all of these different companies. And she said that it is offensive to her resume, it's offensive to her abilities to, to give that to just her being a Black woman, but that she's qualified. And I think she said something that, she's just brilliant, she's excellent at what she does, and just being a Black woman is just the sauce, as she put it. And so I think, I guess, spend a moment talking about what it's like to have to achieve anyway, or have success anyway, in spite of even, when these narratives aren't necessarily in the mainstream.
I mean, Malcolm, I know you and I actually talked about this once, that I went to this talk that Lena Waithe was having. And she said that in a lot of ways, Black excellence is the product of Black trauma, meaning that so many Black people feel like they have to be excellent in order to feel worthy, or in order to justify the space that they take up. Because a lot of Black women, a lot of Black people don't have, the luxury of being average, right? We have to go above and beyond to sometimes just be in a room. Like, mediocrity is a privilege that has not been granted to us. So we're always having to work hard, take the extra step. So when somebody does imply that we're in these rooms or have these jobs for anything other than the fact that we are really damn good, it is offensive. Because we have had to work on being really good, and then extra good, and then sprinkle a little more just to even be, considered. So I absolutely agree with that.
And I agree 1,000% with you, Taylor, because I know in the sports world, even for me, I have to be almost perfect. And we know in sports, you're trying to be perfect in imperfect games. The same for my wife, who is a professional softball player. She has to be twice as good as her white counterparts in a predominantly white sport. I have to do the same, even though the majority in the WNBA is Black women. I still have to be in that perfect percentage, because the margin of error for us is so small that we cannot make mistakes in our profession, or we lose our edge in our jobs in a lot of cases.
So I guess the billion-dollar question is, as a society, how can we change, with people with positions in power? How do we change, the process of looking at Black women different? Is there a certain question that we ask? Education, maybe? What is different avenues that we could change, how people feel and think about Black women?
I think there's not one prescriptive answer, right? This is institutionalized or embedded in society issue as we look at how racism and sexism overlap. But I think part of the solution is what's happening now, right? These conversations about the experiences of Black women, but also centering the voices of Black women so that there is a counter narrative. I feel like some of what Taylor and Natasha and Maria have shared really affirms the kind of differences or nuances of how intersectionality works, particularly for Black women. But there's a general assumption, right, that if you're Black, it's just about racism. If you're a woman, it's just about sexism. But it's these stories, it's the counter narrative that no, I'm not an anomaly. I come from a long line of Black women. This isn't atypical, who are smart, intelligent, who enter spaces that people don't expect to see them in. But we have to start elevating the voices of Black women. We have to start elevating counter narratives to those stereotypes of angry Black female or the token Black female. And so part of it is dismantling this ideology or these ideas that we have built up about who Black women are, when there isn't one set Black woman. We come in a variety of personalities, talents, shades, and we have to start elevating that truth.
As we talk about experiences, I feel as a Black man, I'm tired of having to explain myself, on my position of how I feel like I'm being discriminated. I then look at, my wife, or I look at my daughters, and, I look at you, and I'm like, at what point is it that it's how many times do I have to lay it out to you, the discrimination bit that I'm going through? What point is it that will you accept what I'm talking about? At what point is it, and even in your own lane? So I guess the question really is, how is it in your lane are you changing the environment?
I've started just telling people how I feel. I mean, I think sometimes exposure is a great way to help people understand. So, I'm gonna let you know that people are attacking me because I'm Black and they're sending stuff to my family. So because I'm a woman and I don't feel safe on the road, my dad has to travel with me. And so now you're exposed to that. Like, that's actually happening to me. You can feel however you want to feel about it, but that's real life. And so those are two things that are intersecting. Because I'm a woman, I have to take extra precautions, and because I'm Black, I'm being attacked. You know what I mean? So there's an intersectionality there. And so I've just, ever since when I started telling all of my bosses, like, I'm like sending them Taylor Rook's resume tape and any ones that I can. Like, we need to be better about promoting Black women and having Black women on camera and behind the camera. And so that's important to me. So I'm going to have those conversations. I think, unfortunately, we're tasked with the issue of having to carry that burden. So if we're not going to be the ones that remind people or our bosses, then they're not going to see it.
I think it's important that people can look at Natasha and say, this is a great basketball player. She is a Black woman. It's important that people can look at Dr. Lee and say, this is a smart Black woman. Important that people can turn on their TV and look at Maria and say, this is a Black woman who was on TV, who knows her, who is getting it done. Like, all of that stuff is important. And I know that I feel like I have a responsibility to those people that are looking. Like, I have no issue talking about racism or police brutality or issues that face Black women, because to me, it feels like it's a part of it. And that, I think, is my kind of therapy through this job, is knowing that just my existence could maybe, help somebody else. And I never want to feel muzzled or silenced, like I can't speak my mind, because there's so many times like I heard somebody say something and that stuck with me. And there's also been times where I didn't hear somebody say the thing that they should have, and that stuck with me too. So I don't want to be the latter. I always want to be the former.
But, one of the things I talked about is, sometimes the people that are, that I have a sphere of influence over, or people that connect with me socially, fans, they're going to be a different demographic than some of these guys up here, just the way it is. And so I think sometimes when I'm saying the same thing, a totally different group of people who maybe trusts me or thinks that I'm a good person, or has some sort of aligned, perceived aligned values, they may actually hear it as opposed to it just I guess hearing and listening is two different things. They may actually listen and actually, digest it a little bit. And so I think that's a big deal for sure. I've got a ton of things I wrote down here, so I don't even know where to start. Taylor, one thing you talked about was having a support. I can't remember the word you used. It was like somebody that's going to advocate, an advocate. So how do you go about? I think that's important for anybody, no matter where you come from. And I could give you a long list of people that have advocated for me over the course of my life. How do you go about? How do you get the result of that? Right? You're saying, hey, we need to advocate for ourselves. How do you go about getting that as kind of a common practice?
Yeah, well, I mean, first off, I think it's really great to recognize the role that advocacy has played in your life. And advocacy has played a role in everybody's life, right? But the reason I bring up that term is because too often when I think non-Black people are talking about Black people, they are putting themselves in the shoes of that Black person when they actually can't. Because one thing that they maybe aren't realizing is that the difference isn't that that person is Black and that person is white. It's that you had people in your life that advocated you or helped you because of the position that you are in that maybe this Black person did not have. Does that make sense? So advocates just in general play a big role because they're helping you get to the next step. And I don't know the answer as to how we can create more advocates for those that need them. I just know that we do need to create more. I do wish that I had that answer though, because that to me is a big, reason that we see a gap in so many different places.
Appreciation for being here
and trying to learn and understand that there's some issues that you may not have understood or even knew existed. And so I'm just grateful to be here.